You Aren't Depression's Victim, like I said, didn't start out to be a book. It started out as me trying to figure things out. I have people that ask me, or say to me, I wish I could write a book. And I say the same thing to them: start. Start. It doesn't even have to get away from having it to be perfect and get away from having to figure it all out. Just start writing. Just start putting your thoughts down into files and computer. That's how I did it. And I've got notes already for the next two books. They're sitting there waiting for me. Occasionally I add to them. But, I know I'll get there. But start. That's the only difference between you and me, is I started. And then I do a little more, and then I do a little more. Listen, the book took 16 years before it finally was ready to be published, okay? Margaret Sullivan, what did it take her 20 something years, who wrote Gone with the Wind? I'm not alone. So it doesn't matter how long it takes you. The point is start.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have an author on today that's going to inspire you and encourage you. And if you saw the title of the episode and you're like, I wonder what this is about, Debra's going to be here today to give you some powerful insight to help you on your journey. She has a great story of her own journey, and she's here to share it with us today. Debra, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It's exciting to have you here. I love talking to authors. So inspiring. So before we jump into the book, let's tell everybody where you are in this big world of ours. Let's start there.
Well, I live in South Texas, and I'm not far from where I was actually born and raised. And then I left and went to the East Coast, and then I left there and went to the West Coast, and eventually came back. So I've been all over this country.
Nice. Awesome. I'm up in Canada. Have you been to Canada before?
I have, actually. I've been to Montreal.
Good.
And I've been to Vancouver.
Very good. Two amazing places to go. That's awesome. Awesome. Good stuff. Let's talk about your author journey and how all this started for you. There had to be a point in time when having a book and being a published author was kind of a dream, or maybe not even a thought in the moment, but now here you are out there doing book tours and sharing your book with people. Take us back to the beginning. How did all this begin for you to become an author?
There was a magazine when I was a young teenager. I think it was called Highlight here in the States. And had all kinds of interesting things for you to do and think about as, late tweens and early teens. And somewhere in there was a thing that said, write something and see if you could be an author. And I did, and they got back to me and said, that'd be great, good for you. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like 13, thinking to myself, this would be great. What a neat thing. And it went out of my head, and life went on, and I went a completely different direction. But that was always back there. And then fast forward to 2003, I was part of a business networking group, and one of the gentlemen there had a business journal, and he said, would you be willing to write something for us? And I remembered. I went, wow, sure. And I wrote a column for about a year for him. And that was the beginning of my official writing. Years later, 2008, I became professional at it. But that's where that was the progression of it all.
Wow. Okay, so in those early days of writing for the article, had you had any experience writing, or were you learning as you were going?
I was learning as I was going.
So what kind of authors inspired you then back in the day, early on in your author journey?
Well, you have to understand, in my house, we had lots and lots of books, but they were my parents' books. And in our house, we were encouraged to read anything on the shelves. So at age 11 and 12, I was reading things like Ayn Rand and William James and, those kinds of things, because they were there.
Yeah.
And, and John Steinbeck. And so those kinds of things formed my interest and formed my reading. informed all of that. And later I discovered, many years later, I discovered mysteries and suspense novels and all that. But I started with those big things, not knowing they were big things, just they were books in my house.
I always look at books as like ingredients and spices that we use later on in life, and they kind of just show up. We don't even recognize them in the moment, but it's a book we read when we were a child, or a
Yes.
story we heard, and an author that touched us, and they just kind of flavor what we do. They kind of become the herbs and spices of our journey as an author. And I just kind of like to know where those origins are, because you can then start to see them bleed through the pages as we write. Isn't that amazing how that kind of comes to light?
I always woke up. I was a night owl and an early riser sometimes. And when I would wake up early, it was literally with the sun. And I would grab a book and read, until my mom came in to wake us up, and she'd yell at me for reading in the dark. But I was always reading, and I still am. I have to read something at night before I go to sleep to kind of settle my mind and settle everything. I can't not. No matter what I've been doing, no matter how late it is, I always have to have some time to read.
How does being an avid reader help you as an author?
I remember when my mother introduced me to Dean Koontz, and I remember reading his first book and going, oh my God. I've never seen anyone use so many adjectives and so many descriptives in one sentence. Now that he's changed his writing since, and I remember when he changed it, suddenly you could tell. But for a couple of decades, it was like, wow, look at this. I'd never seen anything like it. And it was fascinating. And it gave me license too. And then, of course, one of my favorite authors was, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And what one sentence is a whole paragraph for him. Now, I learned a lot from them.
So as you wrote your book and started your journey, was there anything that you hear that's popular in author spaces around how to write and the process of writing that you kind of went, that doesn't really work for me as an author. I'm going to go this direction. When everyone else is going that way, I'm going to go the other way, and I'm going to do it my way. Was there anything that you kind of wrestled with as an author?
Well, that's kind of the focus of my life. I'm going to do it my way. And because I've always looked at things differently, my perspective has been different. My viewpoints have been different. Got me into trouble growing up. But as an adult, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And when I got to that I really wanted to write a book, I remember going to a book fair and seeing this husband and, lots of tables at the convention center and all that. And I went up to this one table as a husband and wife, and they had a bunch of books. And I said, listen, I have a question. I guess I'm going to ask you guys this. I said, I have ideas for books, but they're all different topics completely. Can I do that? Is it okay to do that? And he looked at her and she looked at him and they looked at me and said, well, Mark Twain did it. Why not? And I went, yes. Okay, fine.
Ding. Yeah. You have permission.
I have permission. So, it's fine. So I've written my first book, You Aren't Depression's Victim. And and that's one topic. But I'm an environmental journalist by trade. And I have had an idea, and it's starting to push at me for my next book, which has to do with dealing with the environment in a whole other perspective on that. And that's my next book. And then I have another idea after that. They're all different from each other. Nice. So, but now I have permission to do it.
Nice. Awesome. So let's talk about You Aren't Depression's Victim. Let's talk about that. And what was the origin of that book coming to light? Where did this all begin for you? And then let's start talking about the book and what's in there.
I never planned to write this book. In fact, if I had thought I was going to write this book, I just wasn't going to do it. But in 1996, I was living up in the mountains, right near the mountains in Northern California, and in a little cabin surrounded by pastures and summer homes, and there was hardly anybody else there during the year. Yeah. And so it was really country. And I got chronic fatigue. And hopefully nobody listening here has ever had it, because it's incredibly debilitating. You can do nothing. You can barely think. You can't do anything, nor do you want to do anything. And so during that time, I was trying to figure out what was going on with me. I have had depression since age 2.
Wow.
Because I could take it. But I wasn't diagnosed till my mid-40s. So, and when chronic illness or serious illness happens, people with depression are thrown deeper into it, seriously deeper. So that happened with me. And I was trying to figure out what was going on with me because I hadn't been diagnosed yet. So, being somebody with a computer, I started files and started throwing in thoughts, and later discovered people call it journaling. And I would do that over the course of a long period of time, even after I got diagnosed a year or so later, a year and a half later. And there was a lot of unraveling and understanding and figuring out. And it took a long time. And plus, it was very triggering when I'd do it. So sometimes I'd write, for an hour, and then I'd go away for a month. And then sometimes I'd write a few paragraphs and go away for 2 months. So this went on for a very long period of time. And when COVID hit and everything stopped, I went, what am I going to do now? And I looked at the files and realized there was so much material, it had to be a book. And the timing was such that it was a perfect timing for it because so many people had gone over the edge into depression.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's when I decided to do the book. It didn't start that way.
Is the book designed to be a kind of how-to in working through depression, or is it more story-bound where we're going to follow your journey? What is the makeup of the book?
Yes to all of that.
Good.
It ended up being kind of a workbook because whenever I've done presentations or talk with people, I always throw in an exercise anyway, so I couldn't not do that. It's kind of in my DNA. And so it ended up being a workbook. I ask questions that are outside the norm of what people normally ask. Again, I have a different perspective, so that makes sense. And as people answer the questions as they go through the book, they start to see new possibilities that they'd never thought about. It opens up their thinking and their perspective. And that lets them start to see things like ways that we all sabotage ourselves from time to time that we aren't even aware of. Suddenly your awareness starts to open because you're looking at things differently. And the more aware you are, the more you can see, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to do that. Then you have a little bit of power in the face of the stuff. And that gives you leverage to go, wait, I have a choice. Wow, a choice. Oh my. Isn't that a new thought? Empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the book is about. So it's opening up people's perspective, giving them new possibilities, and empowering them in the face of the stuff so that they can make new, different choices that work for them to maybe start taking their lives back in their own hands.
So what's an example of one of the questions that you pose in your book for us to contemplate?
I'm not sure exactly how I word anything anymore because I haven't looked at the questions for a while, but I can give an example of one of the ways we all sabotage ourselves and mostly aren't even aware of it. And that is our negative self-talk. You know, that little voice that yammers at you all the time. You should have done this. You shouldn't have done that. You're good. You're wrong. And on and on and on and on. And mostly you just react to it and don't even know that it happened. And when I finally got into therapy where I was diagnosed, that's one of the things we started to look at. And the more aware of it I became, one day I went, wait, that's not true. That stuff's not true. And I developed for myself. So first, the more aware of it I was, the more I was like, oh my God, this is disgusting stuff. I never let anybody say this stuff about my best friend.
Right.
So then I developed a way to go, wait, stop. And to tell it to quiet down in this particular way. And I talk about how to do that in the book, You Aren't Depression's Victim. And over time, that voice quieted and then went still. still. Now, 2 or 3 times a year, it shows back up again. And I go, really? Seriously? And then I do that little process again, and it goes back to sleep again. So that's just one of the things that the questions can start pointing you towards and enabling you to go, no, not going there.
So for those that are listening and they're wrestling with depression, but no one knows, none of their family knows, their partner doesn't know, their children don't know, they're doing this, they're wrestling in silence, feeling quite alone, feeling like nobody would really understand if they even tried to explain how they feel.
I was one of those.
Right? So what would you say to them? What would you say?
My family, when I was growing up, we didn't talk about depression. I don't know if we knew about it then, but for sure we didn't talk about it. And something like 2/3 of the people with depression have not been diagnosed and aren't really sure they have it in the first place. So they suffer in silence. And the thing that's really important is to be able to reach out to someone you trust, whether it's a clergy person or a counselor or a therapist, someone they feel comfortable they can talk with to begin to shed some light on what's going on. Depression, people ask me, how's depression different than the blues? I had to learn there was such a thing as the blues. My therapist explained, most people have the blues. I said, what's that? And he told me, but I said, seriously? That was like a foreign thought. And the difference between sadness and the blues is this. Here's my explanation. Sadness has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's what the blues are. It does. A beginning, a middle, and an end. Something happens, and then it ends. Depression, you don't know what caused it. You don't know how you got there. You don't know how long you're going to be there or if you're ever going to get out.
Wow.
Yeah. And you feel like you're in a cold, dark tunnel with no way out. That's what depression is like for a lot of us. Some people it's a little different, but for a lot of people that I talk to, it's kind of like that. And for me, being in therapy and then the work I've done on my own has unraveled that stuff. And I've seen and developed strategies for myself from answering the kinds of questions that I ask in the book, You Aren't Depression's Victim, where I can see the stuff coming before it hits now. I can see I'm leaning that direction or I'm heading towards the edge of what I call the depression pit. And I go, wait. No, don't have to do that. Here's what I can do instead to stop or step back. And I do that. And it works.
So, Debra, are there levels in general terms, for now? I know we can get really specific, but overall, are there levels of depression that we can find ourselves in? And is there big gaps between these levels, or do they kind of blend together as one big group? Like, how distinct are these different thoughts around depression?
I'm not sure I can answer it that way.
Okay.
I know that for me, listen, when COVID happened, we all went over the edge. But every day for me, I stood at the edge and held on with my fingernails and said, I'm not going over. And I would teeter towards and I go, wait, no. Sometimes, multiple times a day, I would do this for myself because the cost of going over was too high for me. And like I said, sometimes I would start to go over the edge, and then sometimes I'd literally start to fall, and I'd wait.
Yeah.
So are there levels? I think it's a case of how far down you let yourself go. I could answer it that way.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're allowing yourself in the moment to go there, basically?
When you're aware, yes. When you're aware of it, sure. I have times where I let myself have a pity party. Oh, poor me. Life is terrible. And I start to go over. But I say to myself, you've got X period of time. That's it. Milk it for all you're worth, baby. And at the end of that, okay, I'm done. And I step back. Because, again, the cost is too high to stay there. Another thing that I learned that I did to sabotage myself, and people do this, I've always had, not always, but as an adult, I've often had a dog. And they've been lifesavers for me. And one of my former dogs, Magic, God bless him, when I was deep in depression, and whether I'd had or hadn't been diagnosed, about the time I got him is close to about the time I got diagnosed. It's interesting. I never put that together. And so sometimes what I would do when depression would start to hit, I'd go down on the floor with him and I'd stay there. Guaranteed I fall over the edge. Now, it doesn't mean now that I can't go down and play with my dog on the floor, but there's this voice in my head now that's at a certain point after being down says, get up and get moving. Because what I know is the more you move, depression lifts because your energy moves. Depression happens when your energy gets stuck. It's not the only thing, but that can trigger it. You can be sad and then go into depression because you're just... So get up and get moving. That's the thing for me. That's how I know. That's one of the things that I do for myself. That's one of the strategies I've developed that helps me step back.
Okay, so a person has bought your book. It's sitting in front of them. They're ready to open it for the first time. They're going to read the first chapter, first few paragraphs. Before they do, though, what's your love letter to the reader? What do you want them to know before they read the very first word of your book? What do you want? What's your big hope for them?
The title says it all. You don't have to be depression victim. You aren't depression's victim. You don't have to be. I have spent a lot of years suffering in my life. I don't have to do that anymore. And I was told not to have that as the title, You Aren't Depression's Victim. To which I said, but you don't understand. People living with depression feel like a victim of themselves. This book gives people hope and practical hands-on strategies they can use to help themselves step back from that dark edge.
Interesting. So what was the suggested titles for the book otherwise?
Well, originally it was called something else. What was I going to call it? I don't remember actually at this point. But doing my research, I found 2 other books that were very similar titles, so I had to come up with something new. But I like this one. It works. Yeah.
I like your conviction for the title as well, to hold strong to it, saying, no, this is where we're heading with the book. This is what my vision is. So it's nice that you didn't steer off course because, again, there's somebody going to pick up this book just because of the title alone. So, right.
Yeah. I've had people come to book signings because they saw the title and it intrigued them enough to come and say, what's this about?
What is some of the feedback that you've heard from people now that the book is out in the world?
I've gotten emails from people who've told me that they have given it to friends, relatives, colleagues, because now that they can recognize the symptoms of depression, because I talk about symptoms of depression in the book, they can start to see it around them with people that don't know they have it. And so the book is kind of being passed around to other people and making that kind of difference, which makes me feel good because that's the point.
And that helps kind of solidify for you that you're on the right path with your book as well, right? Because in the early days, you're writing going, I hope it has the impact that I'm intending it to have as I write these words. But it's kind of nice to hear people say, though, that it means something to them.
It does. You have to understand, I didn't read the whole book until after it had been edited twice. Because I'd been writing, because I had all these files. And then I went through the files and edited down. And after the second editing, my editor said, now you need to read it and see if there's something missing. And that's the first time I read the book.
Wow.
So I didn't have a thought until that point.
Okay.
I didn't have a thought about it should make a difference or whatever. Only at that point, that thought began to occur.
That's interesting. What an interesting way to approach the writing, too. Very unique. I love it. It's great. It's good. It's really good. Now, the thing you're doing to promote your book is you're doing book tours. And I'm curious for the authors that are listening who haven't contemplated a book tour, kind of what was your starting point as far as creating a book tour? Any tips for an author that wants
Yeah,
to
I
do a
got
book tour?
cantankerous.
There you go.
Cantankerous. Last year when COVID rules lifted and everybody started going places, I didn't. And I had friends on Facebook saying, I'm going here and I'm going there and I'm taking this plane and going that. And I finally one day said, I've had it. Everybody else is going someplace. I'm going someplace. Okay, where are you going to go? Well, I want to go and do a book tour. Okay. So, I combined it with going to see relatives in the Midwest and doing a Midwest book tour. And then, I've been, for most of the time, not always, I had a publicist in the early days, but now I'm a chief cook and bottle washer. I do it all. And so I had to make the calls and I had to arrange the book signings and I had to do the travel plans and the hotel, everything. And there was a lot to do. I'm glad I'm good at administrative work because there was a lot of it. I would have loved to have delegated, but all in all, it worked out wonderfully. I did book signings in Missouri. I had book signings in and around Chicago, and it was a lot of fun. Some were more successful than others, but the word got out. So, I always say at the end of book signings, and I put it on Facebook, I sold a bunch of books, however many it is. I touched lives and I made a difference. That for me is like my mantra. That's what it's all about. It's not only selling books, it's touching people's lives, getting them to engage with this and look and see, maybe there's another thought here. Maybe there's another way to look at this I never thought about. I had a book signing this past weekend, and I had a young man come up to me. He was a teenager. I don't know if he's maybe 15, 16. And we were talking. And he ended up picking up a book and walking around with it. I think he bought it, but he was going to. You never know for sure if somebody has, but I think he did. But it changed his outlook on this because teenagers have been incredibly hard hit with depression since COVID, and it has not gotten better because I ask them when they come to book signings, and they all say the same thing. It has not gotten any better. And so this is a book that can help because, listen, they fill out the answers to the questions and nobody's there to look over their shoulders. They can be honest with themselves. And that's very freeing for them. There's no peer pressure. It's just for them. And they can start to open up the stuff that's just been on their shoulders and on their heads since COVID hit. So makes me feel like I'm making a difference.
So how does it feel now to be the author with the book on the shelf that some girl's going to be reading before the sun comes up and getting in trouble for reading in the dark? You're now the author with the book on the shelf that they're pulling off to read. How does that feel? Full circle moment for you. You're now that author that you looked up to when you were a kid. What does that feel like?
It still amazes me. It amazes me. For somebody who only had this thought about it, to actually being a writer and an author. It's one thing to be a journalist. That's an amazing career in itself. But to be a writer with a published book, it's like, wow, how cool is that?
Yeah.
And to have your book, I did a book signing a couple weeks ago outside of Houston. And, I talk to people the minute they come into a bookstore. Hi, how are you? Let me tell you about the book. And this couple with their young child looked at me and they said, we saw you when you were here last week and we loved your book. It's made such a difference. And I went, wow, I've never gotten that particular feedback before. That was just, wow.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah.
It is, right? And that's the one thing I always like to highlight for the guests when they come on the show is there's one thing about dreaming about being an author, and there's a lot of people listening to this that are dreaming about being an author. Maybe they're taking steps towards that goal.
Right.
But it's the action and then the results, knowing that you're going to touch lives with your book. That's amazing.
You Are Depression's Victim, like I said, didn't start out to be a book. Started out as me trying to figure things out. I have people that ask me, or say to me, I wish I could write a book. And I say the same thing to them, start. Start. It doesn't even have to get away from having it to be perfect and get away from having to figure it all out. Just start writing. Just start putting your thoughts down into files and computer. That's how I did it. And I've got notes already for the next 2 books. They're sitting there waiting for me. Occasionally I add to them. But, I know I'll get there. But start. That's the only difference between you and me, is I started. And then I do a little more, and then I do a little more. Listen, the book took 16 years before it finally was ready to be published, okay?
Wow.
Margaret Sullivan, what did it take her? 20-something years? Who wrote Gone with the Wind? I'm not alone.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how long it takes you. The point is, start.
That's good advice. That's very good advice. So as people read the book, they get to the last chapter, the last page. Is there something in your heart that tells you as an author that you met your goal, that now that the book is out there and in people's hands, the book is a quote unquote success? What's your metric and measurement for success as an author for your book?
I'm not sure that, how do I answer that?
Trick, right?
It is really, my book is a success in that it's making difference in people's lives. That's one metric of success. And how I know that is people send me emails, friends, colleagues, and people who've been at book signings. I have a larger perspective I'd like to accomplish, which is to have people know about my book on a national level. People know about my book from some of the advertising I do, or they come to my website, debraatlas.com, or friends tell them about it, or they see it on social media, or hear this podcast or other interviews I've done. But I'm always looking to have a bigger audience, because depression, the numbers have gotten worse since COVID, and they are not getting better. They are not. Before COVID hit, it was 1 in 5 American adults had depression. Now it's 1 in 4, and it's going worse. Before COVID, women, it was 1 in 4 at some point in their life would have some form of mental illness or depression. Now it's 1 in 3, and it's going the wrong direction. And the numbers don't lie. And I look at reports, not the ones that tell you that they've polled 100 people. I look at the ones, they're studies that have gone over after 100,000 people, 20,000 people. They know what they're talking about. And globally, it's an epidemic. It's not just here in the United States.
Right.
So that's why I published the book the way that I did instead of going through a publishing house, because it was an epidemic in the States, and I couldn't wait 2 years to go through the machinations of working with a publishing house, which I would have loved to do, and I hope I do in the future, because I didn't have 2 years to wait, or maybe 3. Information had to get out there then. And what I hope is that more people will share this book and start a bigger word of mouth, that I will have the opportunity to address larger and larger groups, hundreds at a time, or more than that at a time, to get the word out about this book, to let people know there are other possibilities than just having to live and suffer with depression. You don't have to.
Right. It's great. Okay, so before I ask my last question, Debra, before we go today, you mentioned already the name of the book and your website, but let's do it again.
Okay.
Or maybe there's a speaker or an event planner looking for a speaker for an event, and you are the perfect speaker for this event, and they want to reach out to you and get in touch with you. All the information will be in the show notes with the podcast, so you can click right through. But for those listening right now in the moment, again, the name of the book and where to get it and how to get in touch with you. And then I have another question at the end.
Well, I have been a professional speaker for a very long time. And I've also, by the way, designed a workshop called Step Back from the Edge that takes the material of my book and goes much deeper than that. And it's something I've tailored it for healthcare workers, and I tailor it for whatever organization wants me to have come and do it. My book is called You Aren't Depression's Victim. It's an easy read, and it is very little jargon in there. And I recommend it to pretty much any age group anyone above maybe age 12, or someone who, like me, started reading it at an early age.
Yeah.
Because it's very understandable. It makes sense to people no matter what age you are, and it's relevant. And my website is my full name, Debra Atlas, DebraAtlas as in Sam.com. And I'm on social media, and I post on social media, and I blog on my website, and so I'm out there.
It's good. And you're helping to raise the awareness and support of those that are looking for help with their depression. So, and those stats are staggering for the amount of people that have had this impact their life. And I love the fact that you have this in the world, Debra, to help people. So thank you for that. Again, one last word of encouragement to authors from your perspective as we close off, to start writing, to get out there and do that. But what are your thoughts around writing in community and having other authors in your corner to support you on your journey? Any thoughts around how we can be better as co-authors together in the community for each other? How can we help and support each other?
That's a wonderful question. Nobody's ever asked me that question. There are a lot of writers groups, writers forums. There is a social media platform called Alignable, 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 that as far as I know, God forbid, it hasn't been hacked yet. And there are pages for writers and authors and journalists, and it's really a useful platform because you can connect that way and ask your questions and use people as resources and like that. It's been very, very helpful. So, and finding a mentor, if you can find a mentor. Mentors have been few and far between for me, but Alignable has been extremely useful. So it's, I've substituted. I do whatever I can do to find things that work, and that's one thing to tell writers. If one thing doesn't work, good, stop, do something else. Now, I don't mean do some other writing, but if one avenue you're pursuing isn't working, stop and see, is there a slightly different avenue that's parallel that you can go that will get you where you want to go or get you closer to where you want to go? Don't give up. Don't give up. If you have an idea for a book or a story or anything creative, don't give up. And especially if somebody tells you no. Here's my thing about people telling me no. I learned years ago, never take the first no or the second, and maybe not the third. When somebody gives me a no, I ask a question that's relevant and get them talking. And then we go a little further. And that's how I've gotten so many of the book signings that I've gotten. That's how I got the 2 workshops that I got at the bat. It's just, I ask questions. And in my book, I talk about You Aren't Depression's Victim. I talk about the different kinds of questions you can ask to get people to talk that aren't yes or no answers.
Nice. So we have to buy the book to get the questions. I love it. See how you did that? Well done. Well done.
And
that's how you do it.
Your Depression's Victim is available in all kinds of places. It started out on Amazon. Now it's on Barnes & Noble. God bless them. I've done so many book signings at Barnes & Noble. It's at a lot of independent bookstores all over the country. And if it's not there, ask them. They will get it.
Good.
And it's available online so many places. And even internationally online, it's available. All you have to do is look. Put in the name of the book, You Aren't Depression's Victim, and then plus bookstores, and then you'll be astounded where it's available. So
it's exciting. Again, to go from some ideas in a file folder on a computer to today. Congratulations, first of all, for following it through to the end and continuing it, and on your book signings and your book tour and getting the chance to meet a 15-year-old and speak life into them through your book. Come on, that is amazing that you have that opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you for writing your book. Yes.
One more thing. I'm now, I've just booked, I'm doing a trip to the Midwest again. that started out as a fun thing, and now I've scheduled a book signing or two. And if you go on my website in about a couple of days, it'll start showing up there too. I'm going to have a book signing in Illinois, not far from Chicago, in mid-April. And I think there'll be one in St. Louis as well the week before. So it's a mini book tour in the Midwest.
I love it.
So
Good.
go to the website and be there in the next couple of days.
I have friends who live in that part of the world, and they would love to come and meet you. So I'll
I'd
pass
love
the
it.
word along as well.
Thank you.
It's awesome, Debra. Thank you so much, everyone. All the information's in the show notes, as always. We'd love for you to reach out to Debra. If you have an event coming up and you're looking for an amazing speaker to come in and give life to your community, please reach out to Debra. I know she'd love to come and share her message with you. Again, Debra, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This has been a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for checking out the latest episode of Living the Next Chapter. I'm so happy to bring on these amazing authors and to share their stories, but I do have to confess I have a problem. And people who know me best will say, Dave, you have more than one problem. My problem is I have more episodes than I can release to you through my audio host, but I have a solution for you. Oh, yes. Head over to our YouTube channel. Subscribe today to our YouTube channel, and you can get the most recent episode. I'm posting this episode today that I recorded today, and you can get it now on YouTube. Jump the line, move right past that big burly guy at the door. You can get right in and get the most recent episode of Living the Next Chapter on our YouTube channel. Make sure you go there. livingthenextchapter.com has all the information. And again, I want to thank you for making this podcast such a great joy to create. Catch you on the next one.